On the same example, now we are trying to solve this problem, right? Whenever we first come on the page, there is no image loading and the image is sort of broken. And what we want from our application is whenever we first load on this page, for example, if we refresh or if we hit this URL, let me remove the slow internet from here and make it fast again. Whenever we come for this URL, the first time we do not actually load an image till the user has to go and click. And this, we want to do it automatically. So let's see what we can do. This is where useEffect comes in. Again, we are trying to fetch some data, and data fetching is an effect. We noted that there before. So I'm gonna go in my app and write a useEffect. The useEffect takes a function, and I'm gonna call this fetch dog image function. And let's just see what happens actually once we just do this. So I went and put that thing in my useEffect. Note what's happening. It is making a lot of network calls. If I just go on XHR, it's just automatically going and randomly calling this function over and over and over and over again, right? Each time we can see that this has made almost 100 requests, 204 requests by now, because each time, let me just first stop this somehow. I'm gonna go stop that page and I am gonna simply put this thing here just so that our app starts working again. But I'm gonna go and explain it now. So how useEffect works is useEffect will call whatever is given as a call back to it, and it will keep calling it every time, every time. And that's one issue. It is fine when we wanted to change the document title, that whenever the state was changing, we were getting a new value and we were just changing that value. But when we are doing a data API call, we don't want to keep calling the data over and over and over again. This page has already been stopped. I want to wait it and I want to refresh it so that the page in the background was automatically calling a lot of API calls, and we really don't want it. What we want is whenever the page loads for the very first time, we want to fetch all of that data. I hope nothing is broke. Okay, cool. So this works for now. What we have encoded here is the second argument of useEffect comes into play. The second argument of useEffect, if we go and look at the documentation, this is taking a time to load, but if we look at the documentation, it says it is a dependency and it is of type of an array. We have given here empty array, which means that this function is not dependent on anything. Note what useEffect takes. useEffect, the first argument is a callback function. So here our callback function is to actually go and fetch an image, right? And that works. The second argument is when it should call that callback. The second argument is when that callback should be essentially called. This is reloading right now because I'm changing the page, and as the page changes, I'm just writing a comment here, and that's why it's reloading. But the second argument is quite an important argument. We're going to see it in week 3 in details, but I want to just give an overview right now. The second argument, if we leave empty, which in JavaScript, in JS means putting null. If we leave it empty, which means it put null, then what happens, it keeps calling the function over and over again. It literally just keeps on calling it infinitely as it keeps going on. The second case could be if we give an array, right? That's what it said. The arguments here, it takes an array of any sort of values essentially, but it takes this square bracket thing, which is an array. So if we give it an array, then we have a few things, right? If we have an empty array, it means only call this action one time when the page loads. This is a dependency array. If we give a null, it means that it is not dependent. It will run as many times as possible. If we give an empty array, it means that it is not dependent on anything, so it will just run once when the page loads, as this is part of the code, and when the JavaScript reads this part, it will try to run it once, but it won't run it over and over again because we have told that this doesn't depend on anything. The third thing we could be doing is if we give some values in the array, then it will change if the value will change. So let's see now. Whenever we first call this page, the function gets called automatically. We can even see the little loading and everything. And that is happening because we have given this as an empty array and nothing else is happening. So if we reload the page, there's this tiny image coming out because initially the code goes, it says this is not dependent on anything, and it'll just run. So now can I just remove this on click from the button and will everything work? Well, no, not really, because this fetch dog effect is only running once when the page is changed. I also want to run it. I also want to run it on clicking the button, so I can just put it in on click. Another way, or let's say if we did not have this fetch dog function, instead of that we had all of this logic inside of here. Let's just remove this for now. Right, we can put all of this logic in fetch dog essentially. This should work. Right, so whenever we load the page for the first time, we hit a new API endpoint and we are able to get the data being loaded from the API. But this fetch dog button doesn't really work now, right? Because we do not have anything. So let's say here we can again go and put up a state, and I'm going to put const button click count, and I'm going to say set button click count, and this is going to be, since this is a count, it will start with 0 because initially the button hasn't been clicked and we don't have any button click counts. And whenever we click the button, I want to set the button click count to be one more than the previous one. So I'm going to do on click is equal to, this doesn't take anything. I'm going to say set button click count, and I'm going to increment the state by 1. I call the state button click count. I'm just going to go and increment it by 1. If you can't see the whole code, let me just zoom that out. Okay, I'll anyway share this link of this code page so that you can go and see for yourself. I even wrote some comments that would help you. The button click count on clicking will increase the count. I can go and probably console log the count and see how it is changing. So let me also do that, console.log button click count. Let me open up the console, or rather I should open this in a new tab and then we can see it properly there. So if I look at my console, let's reload the page. It's 0, 0, 0. All of these values are 0. It's doing it multiple times because this is not the correct way to do a console log. We'll see later how we can do it better so that it only logs a value 1, but we can see essentially the button click count, or let me make it into a object so that now you can see the values properly. The hot reloading broke because of that. I'm going to refresh it again. So you can see the button click count is 0, and if I increase it. Button click count is 1, 2, 3, but now the image is not changing on button clicks, right? We are just changing a state. This is where the third point of useEffect comes. If we give array and if we have an empty value, which we are seeing right now, it will only do it once. But if we give some values in the array, then it will change if the values are changing. And hey, that's exactly what we want. We want that when this button click count is changing, we want to fetch it again. And that is as simple as going and putting this variable into this array. Let's reload the page. So we have this dog image now. The button click count is 0. If I click on this, oof, there is a little bit of an error. Let me see what that error is going on. It is probably related for me to remove this console log. And let's try this again. Oh, I think I have put some state variable name wrong. Let me just go and check that. Button click count is what we want here. And set button click count. This might be a problem with Code Sandbox, so let me make sure that Code Sandbox is running properly first. Because since it keeps hot reloading the code, the destroy is not a function. Where did this occur? This is a good way for you to also see how debugging essentially works, but let's go through this abstract mode. It is trying to response wait my API and effect must not return. Using async and return the promise instead. I think we are accidentally returning a function that we should not be returning. Sorry, this statement return here is wrong. And that was my mistake. We should not be returning anything since this was previously wrapped in a function and we were returning it, but now it is inside that effect. We don't need to return anything. So let me just now go and refresh and see that the page will be working fine now. On the first moment, it goes and it catches some, it goes and fetch the data because it will still run on the very first time as well. But now remember, if I go and change the count, let me go and put the console log for showing you the count. Button click count. Let me refresh the page. We see the button click count is 0. The first time the image is loaded because this variable is 0 and it will run for the very first time. Now this variable is 1 and our effect is running again. This variable becomes 2 and thus our effect also ran again. Let me just remove this for a second. We refresh the page. Always refresh the page. I told you previously not to, but sometimes if you're changing the state or how the effects work, it might get broken. So prefer reloading the whole page. The button click count is 0. The button click count is now 1, but the image is not fetching again. That effect of fetching data is not running over and over again, even if the button click count is changing. And this is where the dependency array comes into play. When I say this effect is now dependent on button click count. So when the button click count changes, you have to refetch again and again. We are going to look into more explanation of what this dependency array is. But remember, if you put this as null, don't do it because it will keep running this data over and over and over again. If you want some effect that to continuously keep running on its own, you should do this, but most of the times you're not going to need this. And especially when you're calling an API, don't keep this or else the API endpoint might even block you because you'll be sending hundreds of requests every minute or something like that. We prefer doing this, the empty array, because we want to say that this effect does not depend on anything. So it will first run when the page actually loads, but never ever again after that because it is not dependent on anything. Or we can pass a variable here, which means that this piece of code, this effect will run for the very first time, but when this data changes, it will run again. Note that this data is currently coming from state, but it necessarily doesn't have to. It can come from a prop, it can come from anywhere, it can come from another data fetching, where you're fetching from network and putting it in state and then again getting back to it. But anyway, if this variable changes, whatever the variables are inside of this dependency array, and they can have more, you can have like more variables. If we had something more, maybe on if it has an error, then we should try to fetch it again, let's say. This will actually do that. If the API endpoint results into error, it will try to fetch it again. But this is not a good solution, because if the API is actually down, it will result into an error again and then try to fetch it, then result into an error, and it will become a loop. We can put as many values, that's why it's an array. But remember, since we have put the button click count here, so whenever this button click count will change, let me just refresh the page and show you again. Whenever this button click count will change, we will be fetching some new data again. This is the essence of what useEffect is. There are more things to useEffect, and we're going to see that in the next class. Let me just recap on GitHub on what your homework is for this week. Let me search for Hack Your Future React repository. And if we go in homework week 2, I think you have an exercise where you have to call this random user on clicking a button you already know. You will be using the dog API endpoint as well, and you'll be using a joke API endpoint as well, which all basically deals how to fetch data. Remember, fetching data, we need 3 things. I have written this down as a comment. I don't want it homework that you do not put these 3 states. They are really important. Both loading and error have to be there. And also what basically useEffect is. And then you have the Hack Your Future, Hack Your Weather project keep on going, where you have to now put a search functionality maybe. This should also be doable.